You are listening to the Justice in Heels podcast with me, your host, Danielle Hayward. Join me as I discuss interesting legal topics with inspiring female legal professionals who paved the way for the rest of us. Welcome to another episode of the Justice in Heels podcast. Today, I have Jennifer Scholtz from Jennifer Scholtz Attorneys with me. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thanks very much. It's good to be here.
So, can you tell our listeners a bit more about yourself? Who are you in a nutshell?
Yes, with pleasure. No problem. I've had to condense it a little bit. So, just to take you back, I graduated from the University of Cape Town, and then my interest was sparked in matrimonial law, and specifically the rights of fathers. When I trained with a leading Gauteng matrimonial lawyer. I was admitted in 1995, so it's a very long time ago. And then thereafter, I decided to go into academia. So I lectured for UNISA for like 5 years and that kind of thing. I started my practice in 2006, so it's been going for about 17 years now. And obviously, I took a specific interest in helping unmarried fathers to acquire their rights, which we'll talk about later. I am a qualified mediator, and I think that's important because our courts have recently started to enforce mediation before you can actually go forward with your matter. So I would just say to the people who are listening to the podcast that it's important now to see a mediator and try and sort your problems out for yourselves with that mediator. Yes, I'm interviewed regularly on the radio. I've had topics such as unmarried fathers, paternity problems that people are having. And then I also lecture in law a lot. So I lecture for the lead program with the Law Society. And then I also lecture at some of the big 5 law firms, and that's in all aspects of not only family law, but all sorts of other subjects as well. And I think my passion definitely lies in my lecturing and my training. And that's me in a bit of a nutshell. Just in terms of what I do, I'm a firm believer in specializing as an attorney. So not just being a jack of all trades. So we only do family law. And I find a lot of people like to come to us because they know that we're highly specialized. So I deal with, well, you'll see on my website, but I deal with, antenuptial contracts, contested and uncontested divorces, adoption, foster care, surrogacy, and that you'll find the categories that I deal with on my website and on LinkedIn, the various pages that I have. So that's me.
Thank you so much for sharing. So, as Jennifer mentioned, we are going to speak about unmarried fathers' rights today. So, firstly, Jennifer, just tell me, why are you so passionate about unmarried fathers' rights?
Well, it's been going on for a long time, my passion for this. I've obviously been around for a long period of time. And I began following in 1999 a man called Laurie Fraser. He was an unmarried father, and he had no rights to his child. The ex-girlfriend put their child up for adoption, and he fought all the way up to the Constitutional Court to try and get rights to his child and be able to adopt his child. So it seems ludicrous that you'd have to adopt your own child. So we've obviously come a long way from then. Um, so he actually got rights for unmarried fathers. He's the one who started everything. And unfortunately, it took him about 9 years to get to the Constitutional Court. So by then, his child had settled with the adoptive parents. And unfortunately, the court said that he would be unable to adopt the child because it wouldn't be in the child's best interests. So he got our rights for us. And then the Children's Act obviously came into being, and that now governs all kinds of things relating to the best interests of children. So I think that in this regard, my message is twofold. So I'm here to talk about women and what their rights are against the unmarried father of the child. And then I'm also here to talk about fathers and what their rights are in terms of the law. So that's where I'm sort of going today with what I'd like to talk about.
Fantastic. So, can you give us some examples of what would parental responsibilities and rights be?
So, parental responsibilities and rights are normally given to both parents, and they include the rights of guardianship. So that's where both parents can make decisions on the major events in children's lives. So if they want to get married under the age of 18, if they wanted to open a business, the education, the religious decisions taken for that child. So most parents would get full parental rights and responsibilities. Then full parental rights and responsibilities also deals with the care of the child. So that's their day-to-day, the day-to-day things in the minor child's life. So, what age they decide about, what age the kids can go on Facebook, what medical procedures the child might have to do. So both parents normally have the right of care. So when the child's with the mother, they would care for the child as they see fit. And when the child's with the father, also the mother then shouldn't interfere with, the father's parenting style. Then it also deals with contact with the child. So both parents must have contact with that child, and that's where father's rights and mother's rights kind of tend to come in. And then the other one is the obligation to maintain the child, and that falls onto both parents. They both have a duty of support. Maintenance isn't really what I'm discussing today, but as I say, it is one of the things that needs to be taken into account. There's been a big drive for people to have not only rights to their child, but parental responsibilities as well. So, that involves the bathing the child, feeding the child, getting to know what that child's routine is, what they eat, and changing their nappies. So, the parents, they must know how to do those things, and they're responsible for the child as well as having all the rights. Sometimes people come to me and all they want is rights, and then I have to make it clear for them that they do have responsibilities towards that child or those children. Yes, so just to give you a couple examples, the fathers, which we kind of just talked about, where they have their difficulties, and then the mothers obviously do their utmost to alienate the child from the father. And the best interests of the child are not to have, oh, sorry, I've lost my train of thought. The best interests of the child are not what the parents want. So we have to be very clear with our clients. It's actually what the child needs, because parents often fight over that. So, we have a client now where false charges of sexual abuse were laid against him, which took a long time in the criminal courts. And then the ex also laid domestic violence charges against the father of the child. So it cost a lot of money and a lot of time. It took us about 2 years in court for him to actually attain his rights. And during that time, he had supervised contact with his children, so it was 2 hours every second weekend, which is, so disappointing for a father. And the Teddy Bear Clinic, the Teddy Bear Clinic deals with sexual abuse cases, so they also came into the case. So it was a very difficult case. But an example, on the other hand, is we have some very fruitful cases, especially where the mom and dad agree to come in for mediation with me. So I'll always ask up front when a client calls me, can we do mediation between the two of you? And in that mediation, we would iron out all the problems that the mom and dad are having, and put a parenting plan into place. So the parenting plan, it's useful for the father because it deals with his rights, his contact with the child, and then it's also useful for the mother if he's paying maintenance. We can also put that into a parenting plan. So those are just a few examples of how things work.
Thank you. So I just want to circle back to what you said about parental alienation. I do find, and you can tell me if you have also like observed this, a lot of mothers will usually say, but the father can't have contact with the children because he doesn't know how to change a nappy, he doesn't know when to feed
Yes,
them, etc., etc. But the problem is, how is he going to learn how to change a nappy or how to feed
exactly.
a child if you don't give him the chance to do that? So that was
Yes.
very interesting to me. Like they just
Mm.
completely want to stop the whole process, which is not how it works,
Yes.
obviously.
Yes. And you get parental alienation is soon to become a crime. So the courts are moving more and more towards putting their feet down in terms of parental alienation. And there's been a few cases actually recently where a mother, and in one case a granny as well, were held in contempt of court. And they were told by the judge, you're going to be jailed for 3 months unless you stick to the parenting plan, or in cases of divorce, the settlement agreement that was entered into. So there's been about 3 cases. And just, yeah, so parental alienation is a big thing. The mothers badmouth the father. They tend to listen in. So when the father's got, telephone calls with the children, they'll sort of hover around and make sure the children only say certain things. And they actually make the child scared. Domestic violence is really a nasty thing to bring against someone, unless it's a
Not
very
to.
legitimate case. I mean, you don't want someone to be physically abused and that kind of thing. But yes, so the children get to hear about the domestic violence. Oh, your dad did this and he hit me and he did this and that. And it places the dad in a very bad light with his kids. So it is a problem, and it is there's a lot of fight now to get parental alienation. Um, made into a crime.
I hope that happens. So, can you give
Yes.
us the circumstances where an unmarried father will have parental responsibilities and rights in terms of the Children's Act?
Sure. So we have a section in the Children's Act that deals specifically with unmarried fathers. Already that's a little bit discriminatory because we don't have a section for unmarried mothers, only for unmarried fathers. So Section 21 allows a father to acquire his parental rights. So the first thing is if he lived with the mother at the time of the child's birth, so they were in a sort of a life partnership. And secondly, if they weren't living, if he wasn't living with the mother, then there's three things that he has to show that he's done. So the first one is that he consents to being identified as the child's father. Some fathers will insist on a paternity test, and I don't think that's a bad thing because you don't want that child, to pay for that child and stuff, and the mom's been devious maybe, and it's not, he's not the father. So it's just confirming paternity. And in African customary law, we have something where the father, if there's an unmarried situation, the father would have to pay damages to the mother's family because the child's born out of wedlock. And in these cases, it's quite difficult because the father is only allowed to see the child once he pays the damages. And the amount of the damages can sometimes be expensive for the father. So that's kind of the African customary law take on it. The other two requirements, the one is where he's in good faith tried to contribute towards the child's upbringing. So more on the emotional side. So taking the child for their vaccinations, for example, going to the child's birth, seeing the child for the first those first few days, which are quite crucial. And then obviously getting the child into a routine, making sure the child's well taken care of. And then the third one is also to the best of his ability, that he's attempted to contribute towards the expenses of the child. And that's not just after the child's born. That can be to put the child on his medical aid as soon as the child's been born. And then to do things like a father will often pay for the scans, contribute towards the hefty costs these days of the birth, assist with what we call the laying in expenses. So that's the baby, buying the baby, like the pram, the cot, and buying the clothes for the baby, or at least contributing, maybe painting the child's room with the mom, and just doing those kinds of things for the baby. So, and that's where he's attempted in good faith. So if he's not allowed to see the child and that kind of thing, he would have to say that, if he has to go to the family advocate, he would just have to say he tried his best. Sometimes it's made difficult for him, sadly.
So, what I also want to discuss with you is there's this huge misconception that you can just sign away your child. And this is also something that I see a lot on social media. Can you tell us a bit more why this is not the case?
Yes, so you do get fathers, and this is for the mothers out there, you get fathers that don't have any interest in their child. So it starts with when the mom conceives. They'll even go as far as saying to the mom, you should have had an abortion, I'm not interested in this child. So that can be really bad. There's a lot of mothers that are in this position with the fathers. And in fact, we've done quite a few agreements where fathers have so little interest in the baby that they do want to sign away their rights, and you can do it in the courts. It's really not a good thing to do, but some fathers just say, yes, I'm happy to terminate my rights to the child. And then they would enter into a settlement agreement with the mom, and that would then be made an order of court. The same thing would happen if when the child's born, the dad would sometimes come to the birth. And then the mom might put his surname onto the birth certificate, or just his name in general as the father of the child. What happens then is he kind of disappears, or he just hasn't got any interest. He doesn't see the child, that kind of thing. And then what happens is the mom, because his name's on the birth certificate, the mom needs consent. So consent, especially traveling outside the Republic of South Africa, you always need consent. When the child gets older, both parents have to sign the school enrollment forms. And what happens then is sometimes the mom can't even find the dad. So we go and we actually try with the court to terminate his parental rights. And if he's only, there's some moms that actually can't go overseas because the fathers refuse to sign the affidavit that you have to sign with Home Affairs. To the extent now that a lot of moms are not putting the dad's name onto the birth certificates and not letting the child take his surname. So that's a very drastic decision to make as a mom, but it circumvents the way of where she can't get consent to do anything. The other type of dad we have, these are the worst type of dads that I'm talking about now. We have amazing dads as well. You get a father who says, I don't want anything to do with the child now, but when the child's 10 or so, I might come back into the child's life, which is so sad.
Sad.
So there you've got to say to them, well, you can't do that. You either have a relationship with the child or you don't. And in cases like that, if the dad does come back, say after 7 years or something like that, the family advocate would be involved, and the father would have to show why he should now be given parental rights. And the family advocate is very against fathers that do that. But on the other side of the coin, we have the most fantastic fathers. All they want is to see their kids, to be able to take their kids, spend quality time, introduce their kids to, their granny and grandpa. And those are the fathers where, I really advocate my rights of unmarried fathers.
So I think it's also just necessary again to mention that it has to be in the best interest of the child. So literally every decision you make in terms of the child needs to follow the best interest of the child concept, basically. So can you tell us what is taken into account when a court tries to establish if something is in the best interest of the child?
Sure. So the best interests of the child are basically paramount in our law, and that's set out in the Children's Act and in the Constitution, where Section 28 deals with the best interests of children, like making sure they have a roof over their heads, they're clothed, they've got food, all that kind of thing. So the best case scenario would be if a child has both parents involved in in their life. But that doesn't, as we know, that doesn't always happen. So the Children's Act came in and tried to alleviate that. And it also says that the best interests of the child are paramount. What we use a lot now is we use what we call the voice of the child. So the voice of the child is where the children themselves get sort of interviewed, not really interviewed, but they go into a session with a psychologist or a social worker, and the child is then asked questions about the mother and father. So, who do you like living with? What does your mom do for you? What does your dad do for you? What is your bond with your mom or dad? So we use a lot of the voice of the child these days. And in fact, the magistrates in the last 6 months or so have been asking to meet the children. So they don't relay to the parents what the children said, but they take the children's wishes into account. And some judges as well have recently started also seeing the children and sort of making a decision based on that, what is in the best interests of the child. So we do a lot now of the voice of the child. Even a younger child maybe wouldn't have a voice, but we get play therapists where they draw pictures and they get the child to show, how they see the family unit and all that kind of thing. So those are for the little ones. They do look at their age, their maturity level, and then what is their relationship with each child. And then in terms of the Act also caters for caregivers, so other people who are giving that child care. So that could be a nanny, for example. They would maybe interview the nanny and see what the nanny does with the child. And also if a granny is involved. On that note, I mean, grannies and grandpas don't have rights in our law. They don't have automatic rights. So they would have to go to court to get their rights. So the caregiver should, always be the mom and dad, but their support system could sometimes also be interviewed by the family advocate. And then they also look at how can each parent provide for that child. So they're not going to say to the dad, well, you have to live in a mansion and have a huge garden and for the child to play in. They're going to see what that dad can reasonably afford in terms of maintenance. That's either done in mediation or it's done by the maintenance court, which is unfortunately can be a long procedure with moms sort of struggling during that time to be able to afford to maintain their kids. So that's just a few sort of cases of the best interest of the child's standard.
That's fascinating. So what advice would you give, firstly, an unmarried father who is struggling to get rights in terms of his child? So let's say, for example, the mother is trying to prohibit him from doing that. And secondly, for a mother who may be unmarried and who's struggling to get the father to contribute financially or to have a relationship with their child.
Yes, so in terms of the father getting his rights, the very first thing we would offer would be mediation with the mom. If mediation, either it reaches a deadlock or the mom says, I'm not coming in for mediation, The next thing that the father can do is he can go to the family advocate. The family advocate, just for listeners who are not sure what the family advocate is, it's basically a governmental institution that assists with the best interests of children in various ways. So the dad could go to the family advocate. They'll then force a mediation. So they'll call both parents in, and the family advocate will then give a certificate for the dad to show that he's got his parental rights. And they give it very easily. So if he's fulfilled those 3 requirements, they're usually happy. But what happens with that certificate is in theory, it's good, but in practice, it doesn't always work out, that he can make joint decisions and that kind of thing. So then what a father can do is take his matter to children's court. The children's court very much deals with access to justice, so for everybody. So clients can actually go on their own to the children's court. You don't need legal representation. You then have a court date, and the court would often put a state social worker in place at that stage to investigate the best interest of the child, and would also send the couple up to, it's like a forced mediation session, up to the family advocate. And the family advocate would then have to put a parenting plan together for the couple. You can also go via the High Court. That makes it expensive, but perhaps the quality of justice dispensed there is probably better than the regional court, the children's court. So that's what fathers can basically do. That's your recourse. Bearing in mind that the children's court is very slow. So the first day it'll be postponed, for the family advocate. Then it'll come back, then the social worker will say what they think, then the magistrate would interview the children. So the time lapses very quickly. So before you know it, it's been like a year, and the father hasn't got any remedies. So that's essentially what we offer to fathers in our law. When it comes to mothers, obviously the first thing with my clients who mothers is the mediation once again. If the father refuses to mediate, often it is a case of maintenance, so he just doesn't want to pay. Even in mediation, he arrives and he's got no papers with him. So the general recourse there would be for the mom to go to the maintenance court. She would fill in a list of the child's expenses, and then that child's expenses, they would have to be reasonable and necessary. You can't have a wish list like, I'd like a new car, so I'm going to put it into my maintenance sheet. So once we've got a figure, when we sit with the maintenance officer with the father, the maintenance officer tries to settle the matter by, saying, what about this amount for maintenance? If it all doesn't go well, then it goes to a proper trial in front of the maintenance officer. The magistrate and the maintenance officer. And then you're forced to bring all your documents, bank statements, pay slips, all the proof of every expense that the mom's asking for. And then obviously the dad is compelled to bring all his documents to court. So in terms of mothers with maintenance, that's what they can do. I can elaborate if you need me to, but that's the basic steps that they can take. And if the mom, when she's pregnant, she doesn't want the dad to have rights. She can, with the mediation with the family advocate, she cannot agree. She cannot agree to a parenting plan and that kind of thing. That stops the dad from basically getting his rights. So that's just a bit of recourse for the mom and a bit of recourse for the dad.
I think it's fantastic advice that you just gave, and I think it's going to help a lot of people. So, on that note, I wanted to ask you, since this podcast is called the Justice in Heels podcast, I wanted to know from
Yes.
you, have you ever been in a situation where you were underestimated purely because you are female?
Yes. So I found when I first started in law, so I did my articles, and then I transgressed into my academia. I found then that men were really bullyish, sort of nasty to women if you were a family law practitioner, any practitioner, in fact. So there was really a trend of bullying. There was a trend of just wanting to earn fees and just bombarding my clients with applications and that kind of thing, which has now been resolved by the process of mediation. So definitely sort of 10 or 15 years after I was admitted, I'd say there was definitely a trend towards that. I try not to be bullied. It's been a long time, so I've learned how to deal with bullies. But on the other hand, I have some very good professional relationships with some of my male colleagues, and they're the ones who they don't bully. They try and resolve things between us. We have roundtable meetings. And those kind of attorneys in family law, I can work with very well. I adopt a very ethical approach to my cases. So I don't believe in just, trying to earn fees. We must do what's best for the children. And I find that there's a lot less litigation now because of the mediation requirement. So so I think it's got a lot better. And at the end of the day, the law should prevail. So it doesn't matter, how you get bullied or they say, I'm going to take you to the legal practice council and all kinds of things like that. We just kind of ignore those people and they must sort of get on with their litigation. And I must say that a lot of women prefer a female attorney for divorces and that kind of thing. Because I think we understand, especially if we have kids, we understand what it's like to have children. And some of not to disrespect the male attorneys, but a lot of them don't have kids. Some of them don't specialize. And so they tend to just try and take the ruthless approach. But we mustn't be bullied as women.
Yeah. I think the like female legal practitioners bring something unique to the legal environment. They have a lot more empathy. I also do
Yes.
not want to stereotype, but it is just like there's a lot of research that went into it. And women and men both bring their own unique set of skills to their profession. Thank you for
Yes.
sharing your story. And thank you so much for being a guest on my podcast. I learned a lot, and I think that our listeners are also going to learn a lot from this episode. Where can our listeners reach you?
Okay, that's it's been lovely being on the podcast and also talking about something that I really enjoy. So I do have a website which is www.jenniferscholtz.co.za. And my email address and phone number is all on that site. I'm also very active on LinkedIn. so people can link with me. I put up interesting articles, not only about South Africa, but about other countries and, how the family law sort of happens in those other countries. I have a Facebook page, Jennifer Scholtz Attorney. And then, Danielle, you'll probably know that I started a group on Facebook called Lawyers Rule. And that's now has 40,000 members. So I'm quite proud of that. I work with a few other admins, so they're a huge help. It's not a group to give legal advice, though. It's more a group which helps candidate legal practitioners, students who are studying law, even attorneys who, law changes every day. So there's even attorneys who are on there that ask questions and that kind of thing.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Justice in Heels podcast. If you like this episode, we would love for you to share it with your friends on social media and tag us. As this is a legal podcast, here is a quick disclaimer. The views expressed in this podcast are solely the views of the individuals involved and not those of the firms, brands, or anyone else that we are affiliated with. Till